It is another short story from M.I. Blue coming out from the silence. This is In the Tunnels by William Sleater. It was the riskiest thing Bay had tried yet. His three-person cell, one man, two women, were going out through trapdoor 12, which was inside the enemy encampment. No one had used trapdoor 12 since the enemy had made camp directly above our section in the tunnels a few days before. The enemy had no idea we were right underneath them, but we knew from the noises above us, and from what I had seen on my own scouting trips, spying on them through spider holes, that there were several helicopters and tanks up there, and many weapons, and food, lots of food. Okay, I know we're better off than a lot of other tunnel fighters. We have rice that isn't rotted yet. We have big rats that can be roasted in the smoky underground kitchen. But you get tired of eating that stuff every day, and in the tunnels there's never much to go around. And the food the enemy has, cans of meat and soup and vegetables and fresh bread and delicious sweet stuff to put on the bread. I'd never tasted any of it myself, but we heard about it from the messengers. No wonder the enemy are so big and fat. But food wasn't the major objective of the mission. The commander's instructions to Bay were to wreck the tanks and helicopters and get as much ammunition as they could carry. We have so little of our own that our only hope is to use the enemy's weapons against them. 3 people probably wouldn't have time to steal any food at all. But the commander didn't want to risk sending more than one cell on his first mission into the enemy camp. We can never fight the enemy directly. There are so many of them, and they are so much stronger than us, with all their expensive planes and tanks and bombs and guns. We're farmers. What we must do is hide and attack them in secret. That's why we have the tunnels. Everybody knows that Bay's cell is the toughest and most daring of all the three-person cells in our section of tunnels. Bay was always a famous fighter, and he chose the two women carefully. Dang and Tran are sisters, whose home was burned down by the enemy. They escaped into the tunnel under their house, which led to other tunnels, and eventually to all 200 miles of tunnels in this underground city. Losing their home made them bitter, and their hatred of the enemy is fierce. Hatred makes them relentless and reliable. There's the one other reason why Bay chose two women to make up his cell. I remember the way he looked at me 2 years ago when I was swimming with my friends in the Brown River. We could spend more time outside then. Bay was already a famous fighter. The way he was looking at me was like something I had been dreaming about. No one else noticed, but I could feel what his eyes meant, and I've never been shy. When my friends had gone, I went and talked to him. I don't think he would have come to me. At first, we looked at each other very steadily while we talked, but soon we were smiling. We understood each other. Bay had been with another man before. I hadn't. But it was what I had wanted for a long time. It's suspicious for a boy and a man 6 years older to be friends. We knew that no one must know about us. It was not easy to find places to meet where we could be alone and safe. Even in the jungle, someone might come quietly along. We continued meeting in the jungle anyway. We laughed a lot when we were alone together, and cried sometimes too. We couldn't keep apart. Of course, I couldn't be at Trapdoor 12 now to say goodbye or good luck when Bay and the others climbed out of the tunnel into the enemy camp. Someone might suspect, and I had other things to do. I was half a mile away riding the bicycle that powers the generator that makes electricity in the underground operating room. They don't think I'm experienced enough to go on dangerous missions yet, so I do all the jobs that require stamina. I'm small for 17, a little over 5 feet, but I'm one of the strongest boys in the village. I can pump the bicycle for a long time without wearing out, even in the tunnel air. I can carry large buckets of water, and I can dig faster than almost anybody. I dug many stretches of the tunnels, and I've been doing a lot of extra digging recently, so I wasn't there to see them go. But I could imagine what the commander would be saying to them. The same ideas we've been taught in school and that are written in pamphlets printed on the presses underground. Never forget, the land is the most important thing, and the enemy came from the other side of the world to take our land away from us. But they only drive us deeper into Mother Earth, and we will die before we let them steal the Earth. The bicycle generator doesn't make a lot of noise. Still, most of the time I'm on the bicycle, I can't hear anything from outside because the patient is screaming. There is nothing to give anyone for the pain when the doctor cuts off arms or legs. But tonight the patient has fainted. It was quiet, only the rasp of the saw and the squeak of the bicycle and the dim, flickering light. And that was why I heard the very bad omen just before the time Bay and Dang and Tran were to go outside. It was the helicopter from the main enemy base, miles away. The helicopter with the loudspeaker, so loud you could hear it inside the tunnels. The enemy knows that if the bodies of our dead are not buried properly, then their souls will never find peace but will wander forever. And so they play for us the wails and moans of wandering souls, speaking in our own language, crying out that if they had only given in to the enemy, they would not be doomed to wander in misery for eternity. Of course we knew that it was only a broadcast, a fake, another evil trick of the enemy. But down in the tunnels, with the dead dying, lying curled up in the walls beside us, hearing it makes you shiver. And I did not like it that Bay and Dang and Tran would be hearing it too, just before this dangerous raid. It made it more difficult not to think that Bay might never come back. The doctor also knew it was the time for their mission. Unfortunate, he murmured, sawing carefully, not looking up from his work. It will only make them hate the enemy more, I said. It will make them more determined to succeed. Then the doctor looked briefly up at me and nodded in approval. That's the right attitude, boy, he said. Soon they'll be sending you out on missions like this. I didn't say anything. It would have sounded immodest, but I was not surprised at what the doctor said. I've always been well liked in the village. It would be different if anybody found out about Bay and me. In spite of my words, I was more worried than ever. Why did the enemy have to broadcast wandering souls right at this time? I pedaled harder, trying not to think of it. But I couldn't help picturing what was going on outside. Bay pushing up carefully hidden trapdoor 12 with jungle foliage growing right out of it, so the enemy will never find it. He and Dang and Tran climbing silently out into the starlit brightness. Even night outside is brighter than the tunnels, and even though this dangerous mission lay ahead of them, they would be feeling what you always feel when you leave the tunnels, the vastness of the earth and the sky and the air that moves and does not smell of unwashed bodies and sewage. There is always that bliss when you go outside. But they wouldn't stand around enjoying it. They would move silently from tree to tree, always alert, always keeping hidden. They wouldn't be careless, even though most of the enemy were asleep. Of course, there were enemy guards, but the guards were stationed around the perimeter of the encampment, watching for intruders from outside. They had no idea that we could attack them from within their own lines. Even if the guards had heard a few sounds from the inside the camp, they would assume it to be their own men. And Bay and Dang and Tran might have to make a few sounds as they entered the tanks and helicopters. First, they would plant the explosives, the most important part of the job. These were the very special remote-controlled bombs, stolen from the enemy by another group. They were given to us when the enemy camped above us. Even if something went wrong after the bombs were planted, they could still be detonated from inside the tunnels. But nothing will go wrong, I said to myself, sweating on the bicycle. And after the bombs were planted, they would take out the weapons and ammunition. They would carry it, making trip after trip to the trap door, where people waiting underneath would take it inside, and then... Okay, boy, enough, the doctor said. The stump of the patient's leg was bandaged. The nurse had finished cleaning up. She lit the oil lamp made from an old medicine bottle. I stopped pumping, and the electric light blinked out. And then, following the nurse's point of light in the blackness, the doctor and I carried the patient to the hospital ward. We didn't have to drag him because in the hospital the ceiling is higher than usual, high enough for me to stand upright. In most of the tunnels you have to walk bent over or crawl. Go get some rest, boy. You worked hard tonight, the doctor said after we put the patient in his hammock. I nodded, but I didn't go to rest. I went to the false tunnel and began digging again. The false tunnel leads nowhere. It is there to trick any enemy who might enter the tunnel complex. It goes on for a ways, carving, and then turns a sharp corner directly into a booby trap, a tripwire that will set off a hidden homemade grenade. So there's no reason for any of us to go down the curving false tunnel, and no one ever does. That made it the perfect place for my secret project. I was almost finished, and I was determined to finish it tonight. When Bay and I had met alone in the jungle, he was very gentle with me. It was always very beautiful when we were with each other. I kept thinking about how much we laughed. But we had never been able to sleep all night together, and now in the tunnels, with no privacy at all, we hardly ever see each other alone. It's like a physical pain, missing the one you love so much. That's why I was working so hard now. It was like the way I had first just gone over and talked to Bay. When I decide on something, I do it. The false tunnel is closer to trapdoor 12 than the hospital is. I had just managed to attach the parachute fabric to the ceiling when I heard the commotion. It wasn't a commotion like outside. You have to be quiet in the tunnels. But you learn to hear well in the darkness, and the quick footsteps and urgent whispering were as clear as a sign of danger to me as the sound of guns and screams in a village outside. I left the false tunnel and scurried bent over toward trapdoor 12. I knew the tunnels so well I didn't have to feel my way, even when it's as dark as if my eyes were closed. Had something happened to Bay? I was afraid to know, but I couldn't stay away, and it was only natural that people would come to help. No one would think that it was strange that I was in there now. In the tunnel, just below the trap door, someone had a dim oil lamp. Dang and Tran were there, and the commander and some other men. But where was Bay? I couldn't ask them about him directly. Are you okay? I whispered to Tran. What? And then Bay jumped lightly through the trap door. He didn't say a word. He stepped back, pulled the cover off the booby trap. Bright light splashed down from an enemy flashlight. There were enemy voices. And then down came an enemy soldier, a small one. He didn't have trouble squeezing through the trap door. He fell easily down and onto the sharp bamboo spikes in the uncovered pit directly underneath. In the light of the flashlight above him, Bay silently slit the enemy's throat before he could even scream. Detonate now! Hurry! He whispered. He didn't turn and look at the commander or at anyone. His eyes had adjusted to the light outside, and he'd be blind inside the tunnel now. Another enemy soldier was shooting outside the tunnel. Now they would know about trapdoor 12. We'd have to run from this section of the tunnels and abandon it for the enemy to discover and try to destroy. I had worked for so many weeks on my secret project, but that was a selfish thought. I stifled my disappointment. Bay pulled himself up through the trap door just as the commander pushed the detonator. The bombs went off outside, and the tunnel shook, and earth spilled down, and then the top half of a dead enemy soldier was hanging down inside the trap door. Bay must have killed him while he was distracted by the helicopters blowing up. He was bigger and fatter than the other one. He was stuck, blocking the entrance. But if we couldn't get him out of there and Bay couldn't get through, he'd be captured. No one had to say it. We tugged at the enemy's arms. He was really wedged in there. And then there was a shower of earth from the trapdoor, and he came tumbling through onto the body of his companion. Bay came after him, standing on the bodies as he snugly fitted trapdoor 12 back in place above him. He stumbled off the bodies and crouched against the wall. I'm okay, he whispered, breathing hard. Those were the only two who saw us. The rest won't have any idea how we got in. Good work, the commander said. With your cell, it's always good work, Bay, he added. He rarely said anything so complimentary to anyone. I went over to pick up some of the M14s that had not yet been carried to the storage room down below. A small pile of them was right next to Bay's feet, and as I bent over, I whispered to him, Bay, I have a surprise. Come to the false tunnel. I hoped no one heard me. I picked up the guns and hurried away. And then, in the small room I had made in the curving false tunnel, I waited. It would take a while for Bay and Dang and Tran to describe the layout of the camp to the commander and the secretary, who would write it all down. Bay and Dang and Tran are an elite cell. That means they have their own sleeping quarters, a rare privilege. And that was the other reason Bay chose Dang and Tran. He's known them all his life. They're women and understand some things better than most of the men. They wouldn't report him if he sometimes spent unexplained time away from his cell, or even slept in another place. And now we had a place. I heard his familiar step. I lit the candle. Bay, in here! He could hardly believe I had dug a bedroom for us. He was astonished. He was also careful. Nobody knows? He said. Nobody. Dang and Tran won't be a problem, will they? I told them I'd be away for a little while. They didn't ask any questions. And, oh, to be able to sleep together. And then he cried. Bay can cry with me. I couldn't do those things if I didn't have you to come back to, he said. And we laid there in each other's arms, listening to the shouting Americans running back and forth above us as the sun came up outside.